Welcome to the Lightwork Women podcast. We are experienced women with credibility. We know what life is like. Transform your life with our top-tier psychic and wellness services. We offer effective solutions tailored to empower you on your journey to spiritual wellness. In this podcast series, we talk about tarot, mediumship, Reiki, mental health, magic, witchcraft, and much, much more. We hope you enjoy our show. Please get a cuppa, have a seat, have a listen. And just remember, many hands make light work. Welcome to another episode of Lightwork Women. This episode, we're going to be doing a mini 4-part series with myself, Renee Gee from New Angel Tarot, and Robyn Ridley from the Goddess Sanctuary. Welcome, Robyn. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Renee. Lovely to see you again.
Always. We love getting together and talking about everything that we love. And, you know, the goddess topic is very much close to Robyn's heart. She runs this business called the Goddess Sanctuary. You can go check that out and more details as well at her official website, robynridley.com. I'll leave the links below as well. But in today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of the 4 goddesses that make up pretty much the goddess asteroids of the sky. And the 4 goddesses that essentially that we're going to be talking about will be Ceres or Ceres, also known as Demeter. And then we also have our other 3 beautiful goddesses as well, Athena, Vesta, and Juno. And those other 3 goddesses we'll be talking about later on in the year. But just to kick off, we're starting with probably the most famous of them all, the Greek goddess Ceres. So, and also just before we get into that too, we're kind of just going to be approaching it into 3 categories. So we're going to talk about the mythology behind her, the psychology, and then dive into astrologically how she can be represented, and maybe talk about where you might find her in your natal chart if we want to go there as well. So I'll get you to kick off, Robyn. Let's talk about Ceres.
Yay, wonderful. So as Renee said, Ceres is one of the well-known goddesses, and she's a Roman goddess, and Demeter is the Greek goddess. So we'll be talking more about her as the Roman goddess, but, you know, they're interchangeable with the mythology. She is known as the Great Mother, and I think this is in itself brings so much to the fore of what we think of a mother archetype. So this gives us an opportunity to look at that. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at, okay, she is the goddess of agriculture and harvest. Also has been said fertility as well. So therefore she aligns with many other goddesses, which we know of also is Inanna, Ishtar, and Isis. And then also fertility-wise, Gaia, Rhea, and Tara. So, you know, it's wonderful how many of the information about these goddesses is interchangeable. But when we're talking about the mythology of Ceres or Demeter, we're talking about her as a vulnerable goddess, and she was a mother of Persephone. And Persephone was a beautiful young maiden and could have had many suitors if such was allowed. But her and her mother were really close, and they maintained this relationship. And therefore, Ceres was always on the lookout for people approaching Persephone and protected her. But there was, in mythology, there was a day when she wasn't around, and she was taken to the underworld by Pluto. And if you're looking at the Greek influence, Hades, and it's here where she was tricked into having eating the pomegranate, and that kept her bound to him and bound to the underworld, and never to return at that point. And when this happened, Ceres and Demeter actually grieved as any mother would at the loss of a child. As she grieved, everything became barren, because she was the goddess of harvest, and she had so much grief and she had so much anger, and she just wiped everything out. It was like no nourishment for anybody. And so, you know, this became a really tough time. But I guess to cut a long story short, it was like, well, we can't take away the sustenance for the world at this time. So there was a proposition that Persephone would be allowed back up from the underworld to connect and with her mother, but only at certain times of the year. Hence, we have succumbed to the seasons. So when harvest was fruitful, we know that she had returned and her relationship with her mother was re-established. So, and obviously when everything was barren, she had gone back down to the underworld. So this opens up a lot of discussion, actually. You could talk about this forever. You've got
Mm,
this mother-child bond. I mean, we've all got a mother, and our relationships vary, and the way that we connect with our mother varies. But we can't take away the fact that there's this element of attachment, or detachment, as sometimes happens. But it's like brings in so much of that information. So before I go any further, Renee, I might just talk a little bit about what you usually see her with, like her crown on her head is usually got the corn and the wheat. She's quite often seen with poppies and wheat in one hand, and I think a light or a torch in the other. So very much about being able to see the way, being able to pull the fruits from the harvest. The glyph for Ceres is the sickle, which is a gift of agriculture. And we can, as Renee said, we can look at that in all of our birth charts. And that sort of tells us a little bit about our link with our mother, or the way we might mother, or whatever that, however way we want to look at that. And I think when we look at that, I mean, ultimately, we're looking at with these goddesses, the unconditional love is the first step. And this is what, is like to be seen as what one might say the ideal. Um, but I guess I will go on later and talk about, or we will discuss it, the astrological influences, which I find fascinating, and of course
mm.
some of the psychological. So, Renee, did you want to add anything there in relation to the mythology? Because I only just did it basically.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's such an intense kind of study as well. You can study Greek mythology, Roman mythology, so many deities. There's just so much history there.
Mm.
Um, but what I always find really beautiful about studying this kind of thing is just the the balance of day and night. And she had, according to legend, she consumed 6 pomegranate seeds, and those,
Mm.
six first half 6 months of the year versus the other 6 months of the year. That was when she kind of, it's a little bit like co-parenting. Like you can have her for 6 months, and then
Yes.
the mother can have her for 6 months. So as above, so below. There's all these synchronicities with these hermetic axioms and all of that as well, which I absolutely love. But it is a very deep subject because it is such a feminine discussion. And
Mm.
obviously the ability for women to give birth, or to represent fertility, whether it be the land or actually procreating and having children. um, it's just such a beautiful subject because it can mean so many things to so many people, whether it be celebrating the spring and summer aspect of the seasonal, when she was spending time with her mother, Demeter, or with Persephone with Demeter, or whether or not she was then, put back into the underworld with autumn and winter, to spend time with Hades again, or Pluto, if you're talking about Greek or Roman. But
Yeah.
either way, it's as above, so below. And when the sun is shining, we're above the ground. And when we're, especially in the southern hemisphere at the moment, we're about to go into winter. So it's a very different energy, and it's a very different time to sort of reflect and restore. And those are those themes of death, rebirth, and fertility. But just on the mythology as well, with that referencing what you said with the crown and the scepter, the symbolism, for example, on the tarot with the major arcana card of the Empress. She represents the goddess of the grain. She's obviously got the wheat at her feet.
Mm.
And I love the fact that, there's so much lineage with the language of the words themselves. Demeter, DE is grain, and meter represents mother. And then we
Mm.
also had like Ceres, which has now been extended to, the word cereal. Breakfast cereal is an extension of that, link to agriculture and wheat, which is a
Mm.
life form. It's a sustenance. But I'm digressing a little bit. The mythology of Demeter represented in the tarot is also just amazing. Like we have all these beautiful tools that we can use to reference and honor her as part of, our spiritual growth and our divine feminine, pathway, and how we share that with others. I am excited to get into the astrology part of it, but essentially the mythology and is just one of those crazy ways that, back before there was all the knowledge that we have now and the technology available to us to study all of these things. Um, there were even, temples erected and ritual sites to
Yes.
celebrate her and be immersed on the land itself in the shape of, these goddesses to sort of these neophytes back in the day would actually be connected to the land in order to, pay homage to her and the ritual
Mhm.
itself. But I also wanted, if you wanted to also just add about um, the Eleusinian, is that how you
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Eleusinian mysteries, which is one of
Yeah.
those important religious rites that
Hmm.
usually it's an ancient Greek thing where they would basically have these initiations and they would talk about purification and fasting, and
Yeah.
women would get together essentially to celebrate these sacred sort of things that only women can experience. And
Hmm.
so it was a very pagan sort of obviously process, and then it sort of died out, obviously, with the rise of the Roman Empire. But that
Yeah.
in itself was quite mysterious. And if people are interested in the symbols and the ritual side of that, they had this thing. I looked it up. It was about a sacred object like the Kykeon, which is a special brew, and they would have these processions and perhaps the reenactments of myth. So it was sort of performance, food, wine, and the process of ritual,
Yeah.
which a lot of women get together and sort of do in different shapes and forms in the modern day. But we're still trying to let other people understand where that came from and continue that legacy.
Yeah, when you spoke of the Eleusinian mysteries, like that's like a transformational mystery, and
Mm.
like you said, it is the cycle of birth, death, and renewal. And I feel when we talk about like how do we work with the goddess, like when we invoke the goddess, like
Mm.
you're saying, we have food, we have like for me, it was like breaking the bread. It was the grain, beautiful.
Mm.
Um, but we can just work with them by invoking them. And but I do love, as you so beautifully pointed out, all those gorgeous rituals that are sort of, you know, in the past, but so interesting. I was reading about them previously and I just went, oh, there's so much here. Like you could talk for an hour just on that. You
Yeah, I think having this four-part series is a bit of a, just a nice sort of taste
taste
test.
stuff.
If people, want to go in further with that, or as I said, visit your website and maybe look at doing some coursework and things as well, because you are the goddess expert as part of our collective Lightwork Women, which I actually forgot to mention. This is part of the
Yeah.
Lightwork Women Collective.
Oh, dear.
Um, but the mythology is great, and that trying to make sense. Back in the day when they didn't have sort of the information that we have now, it's really all just about making sense of the world,
It
whether or
is.
not you're following the seasons or, creating
Mhm.
these myths and legends around certain things. That's how they made sense of the universe. I mean, women were extremely mysterious the way that we bled, but we didn't die, and all of
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
The Egyptian connection to it as well was quite
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, and definitely, and like just that addressing humanity's fears and concerns about death. So it's like traversing the
Mm.
passage between death and rebirth, like during our life here on Earth. So, like you said, all the archetypical approach as well. So, mm, and that leads us nicely into our next subject, I guess, when you're ready.
Yeah, well, you can kick off. We're going to talk about
Mm,
the psychology and what
yeah.
those themes represent with, the women today and the psychology of that of those mythologies. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're looking at psychological, I've looked at it more as the themes, and I really believe like unconditional love, as we said, and acceptance. Now, The experience for each woman is so totally different. And if we start to look at these, I think it leads nicely into when we go on to talk about astrology, when we start to look at our own personal influences, is when we unlock the key to where we might be, you know, not so versed, I guess, in some of these things, and might be lacking is where we need to, pull forward some strengths. Because if we weren't loved unconditionally as a child, we're already developing strategies to how we can get that love.
Mm,
So unconditional love and acceptance is not just a straightforward statement, it's a whole process. And
mm,
that's what I love about these psychological themes when we look at that, because there's, when you're looking at that, there's an effect of loss because you haven't got what you've needed. And that fits perfectly with the mythology of the loss, the time of loss, the time of grief. So women, well, anyone can encounter the loss and grief when their needs haven't been met as a child, and this is when a lot of the psychological stuff forms. Stuff,
mm.
that's a really good word, isn't it? But you know what I mean, when it
Yeah.
forms. And how do we develop that sense of attachment and detachment or aversion? And you look at that and you go, and then you get this over attachment where people are trying to fulfill a void. And then you get this
Mm,
detachment because they don't know how to relate. So
mm,
all these psychological components are affected by this simple story, if you like, or mythology. And then that, and I so love talking about this with astrology, but the sharing and the letting go. Um, how do we learn to do that? Where did we learn to do that? And also, I think the themes of transformation are huge with this. There's so much that is transformed in this process that we don't think about, like where does Demeter, Ceres fit, or Demeter, and where does Persephone fit? Where the transformation in their relationship, in their sense of self. And this
mm,
is the same for all of us. So it's not just about a story, it is about a whole process of who am I? Like, who am I?
mm,
And I guess when we're looking at that, she was a single parent. So the responsibilities around that, there's a sense of, when someone is single parenting, how does that work out? What role do you play? Are you mother and father? Or are you just mother? Like, what are you? What's in the whole equation? What's missing? So it just goes on and on
mm,
when we're looking at that. And I think also relationship with nature and the earth energies, because you could see the power in that with her ability to create seed into harvest, into whatever. She had that ability to work with the earth, and we are walking this earth. And for us as women in particular, I think we have that beautiful cycle that can keep us connected to Gaia if that's what we so choose. Or I guess if we're so aware would be more to the point as well, because some people aren't aware of that. Um, Ultimately, there's a lot of growth that was had in that whole process. And so you can see I'm relating this to psychological growth. There's growth that has to happen.
mm,
Our ability to function in life, our ability to be productive, our ability to work. And then I think ultimately also, where does this fit in relation to the old themes? Like, I think, um, we talk about psychology, we talk about astrology, but we also, we talk about the occult, and a lot of this can come into that, and we can look back in that as well. So we can go exploring. And you mentioned about bleeding. The blood complex is huge. Like,
mm,
women have the blood from the womb, and then the men have semen. This is all part of the occult process of this whole story as well. So it's just like,
mm.
where do you want to go when you look at this, and what do you want to dive into? So I guess on that note, um, Renee, I will throw it open to you to see what you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, it when obviously there are so many themes around growing up as a child, whether you're a
Mm,
female and you've been adopted or you've had parents that weren't, maternal, or a mother that wasn't maternal. Maybe you were lucky and you did have a good connection with your mother, and maybe, but it's quite common. I mean, we're tarot readers, we counsel, we talk to women all the
Yeah,
time,
we
and it's
do.
very common that, mothers and daughters are estranged, or they're not talking to one another, or the daughter has their own children and then doesn't want to have her own children like connected to any themes and, things that may have, how she was raised herself.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
essentially, it circles back entirely to a cyclical process of seasonal change, the transformation of love and loss, nurturing things as
mm,
they are, young and growing. And that is also nurturing yourself, nurturing yourself as an independent woman without any sort of guidance. I mean, I can speak from my own personal experience. Um, we sort of provide nurturing of ourselves and others through those changes, and whether they be changes of, growth, friendship, hardship, work associations, anything that you sort of connect yourself to that is life affirming, or potentially, people look for love and friendship in different ways, in different arenas,
yeah.
whether or not they're through collective groups like Work Women, which is where we all come together and talk about different subjects and share our stories, but also, in a corporate level, you might actually make new friends in a business setting, or become, have good relationship with women who are in positions of power. That's where I sort of feel, I think a lot of the time there could be more of. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, in those sorts of settings, it's not like every boss that you're going to have, which is female, are going to be quite open to go, hey, let's get a coffee and have a chat. It's not all business. And
Mm,
that to me is quite disappointing, but that's another story. Um, yeah, I think the bottom line is reflecting, those bonds of pain and separation, because that's essentially what it is. And then I could go on another full on tangent and talk about, the bovine and the
yep.
cow that is, milked, and then
Hmm.
the baby is taken away from the calf, is taken away from the mother, so we can have, or I don't, but people have dairy in their coffee or their latte or whatever. And I think, well, that's another process. That's another form of pain and loss and separation for
Mm,
somebody else's profit, capital gains, satisfaction. It's the cycle of life that we either choose to contribute to or not. Um, but yeah, it's random. Like, you could talk about a whole heap of things with anything divine feminine, and that destruction of death and rebirth. But to your point, Robyn, it's important, just like the Empress in the tarot, to reconnect with nature, because I know that when anyone's stressed out, or you've had burnout, especially with work or anything like that, what do people do? They go to wellness retreats, they reconnect with nature, they go for a hike, or they
yeah.
might just take their shoes off and go to a park or in their backyard and just put their bare feet on the ground and
Yeah.
just take a few deep breaths and actually connect
Yeah.
with the earth, because that has such healing power.
Sure does.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, well, I think that's sort of can lead us now, I guess, to discuss astrology, because we're
Yeah.
really going to be bringing in all this over again in some respects, if
Yeah,
that makes
totally.
sense. So, the astrological things that I read, which I love, are Demeter George and Douglas Block. And that is about the asteroid goddesses, but it's like, so for those who don't know, the asteroid goddesses are found in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and they are celestial bodies in the sky, and they are obviously, one of them is Ceres, which is absolutely wonderful as we discuss this today.
Mm.
So we'll be looking at that as well when we're talking about the astrology, because what I've found in what I've been looking at is there's like, she sort of has like three rulerships in a sense here as to what feels appropriate. And the
Mm.
first one is linked with like ruling Cancer in some respects.
Yes.
And I guess, yeah, I guess that's amazing, because there is, you
It's the
know,
mother, it's the breast, it's,
yes,
the
I
maternal.
know, the
Yeah,
universal mother.
totally.
And so that also brings in the psychological components as well, because that's all part of that caring and nurturing, which is part of the Cancer qualities.
Yeah.
And I think when something I found fascinating only because this is a subject that I'm really, connected with, is food complexes as well. There can be food complexes because we're trying to get nourishment from something. I just thought this was
Oh, yeah, of
amazing.
course.
And this whole process of anorexia, bulimia, for want of a better, so starvation or excess, it's just that whole thing, that attachment, detachment, that whole, that polarity. And
Mm,
they talk about that quite intimately, and I found that fascinating. But it's also linked to, the way that we relate in relationships. We know, cancer relates different in relationships to other signs.
mm,
And so this is sort of saying, well, the link with Demeter and Ceres is so much about, yeah, like a cancer felt relationship. So that's what I was thinking. I was wondering what you thought about that, because we know then there's a link with the moon, because we're talking the divine feminine or the rising feminine, or,
mm.
so we know there's a link with the moon. How do you feel about the chariot, Renee, with part of that? Because I hadn't really thought about that, but it is, you know, linked to cancer.
Mm. Um, well, absolutely. I mean, you think of
Mm,
any zodiac sign that is maternal,
mm,
it is Cancer,
yeah,
because Cancer is the home and the mother and the ancestral
yeah,
root and all of that sort of thing,
all of
and
that.
rules the
Yeah,
breasts and,
yeah,
the feeding of children and
parent
all of that
child.
sort of thing.
Mm,
But also, it's kind of interesting because I sort of have looked at the overarching four asteroid goddesses being Ceres, Pallas or Athena,
yep, yep,
Vesta, and Juno. And when you
yep.
break them down just really briefly, you could refer to Ceres as earth, Pallas as air or the mind,
Mm-hmm.
Vesta as fire,
Mm,
and Juno as water because that's relationships and all that
yep,
sort of thing. It
yep,
depends on, I guess, how you look at it. But
yeah.
the themes are food, care, emotional security, cycles
Mm-hmm.
of life and death, motherhood, and
Yep,
grief. Um, Circling back to the original mythology of Ceres
yep.
Demeter, when she lost Persephone and then she decided to kind of, it was almost like wrath, wrath
Yes, yes.
of
Yep,
any kind of growth, any kind of, the lands were bare.
yep.
So she sort of punished the earth
Mm-hmm.
because of her grief.
Yes.
And in many ways, as a female as well, if anyone has ever experienced um, any kind of, I guess, trauma, let's
Mm,
just use that sort of broad term,
mm,
it can often make us also withdraw from
mm,
providing
mm,
anything to anybody. Or, there's also that theme around sexuality with women in relationships. If they've, lost a child or something's happened, the woman will retract, and the man
mm,
in the relationship may feel shut out
mm-hmm.
or actually um, deprived, for want of a better
Yep,
word as well, of
yep.
any kind of reciprocation of continuing that cycle of, love and fertility and maybe wanting to have more children or whatever that looks like. So it is a
Mm,
very sensitive issue, but in terms of the astrology, sorry, I digressed a little bit there. I had a quick look at where my Ceres is, and I've got her in Pisces in my 10th house.
mm-hmm.
So I don't know, maybe the way I would interpret that, because I don't have children of my own, my spiritual family is really important to me. And I love to nurture people by getting them to think about life outside of the pentacle, which is very
Mm-hmm.
earth,
Yep.
and get them to sort of consider, the spiritual realm and the realm
Mm-hmm.
of Pisces, which is dream and imagination and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I would encourage anybody, including students of mine, which I also sort of see as my, my own, they're my kids, they're my family.
Oh, good. I'm there.
Um, you could sort of make a parallel with that maybe. Where's your
Yeah.
Ceres in your
My
astrology?
Ceres is in fourth house in Gemini.
Oh,
Mm,
okay.
mm.
So how do you navigate that? How do you interpret that one for
I
yourself?
really feel that there's some sort of sense of, like, obviously it's home. It's at the root of the chart, and so it
Mm,
is being at home. So obviously home is really important to me. How I go about that is obviously dependent on the way that I was brought up as well. And I think, like you said, and I'm going to lead into the next part soon because I think it fits. But it's
mm,
like, Okay, so I've got Taurus in the same house, my sun sign, and I've got a heap of other things in there. She's actually conjunct Venus, Ceres. So
Oh,
I
wow.
feel like it's the way, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's the way I
Mm,
make sense of everything because I've got a big cluster down there in Gemini. So
yep.
even though it's in down in the in the foundations, I guess, um, which is obviously Cancer normally, but I feel like that Gemini influences how I make sense of everything. And I feel like because they're all there, they're supporting each other or not.
Mm,
But I think that's how I have to make sense of things. I have to understand. I have
yeah.
to know on that level as well. So lots of things there. But that leads me to the second astrological component that I was looking at was ruling over the Taurus Scorpio polarity. I love this. It
Mm,
felt, I've got goosebumps. The Taurus, you've been talking about the earth, the connection with the earth, Demeter.
yep.
So you
Yep.
can see the Cancer influence as that nurturing quality of, of her.
Correct.
Then we go into this earth and Scorpio polarity, and it's like, oh my God, that's that attachment and aversion, isn't it? It's you're either, you're right in there, you're attached, you're connected to the
You're
earth,
either
all that,
invested or
yeah,
you're not.
all that you were saying. And then you go over to the Scorpio polarity, and it's like, I'm out of here, detached.
Mm.
This whole, because I'm fascinated by that cycle. I've got a lot of interest in that cycle.
Well, you are Taurus, so
Yes, I
that's, yeah.
know. And
Mm,
Scorpio moon. So I find that really, yeah. But it's interesting when we're looking at that because what we're looking at is the attachment and separation, the way that we've been affected and the way that we operate. So it's so good. One of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is know ourselves and
mm,
actually know how we operate, not judge it, just know it, just see it. Go on, shit, that was a bit shitty, wasn't it? Like, and it's like,
mm.
it's okay. It's just where I'm at. And so that attachment and separation is like, take that a step further and you're looking at the death and dying process with the Scorpio. You know,
Mm.
What's that saying? In every breath, there's a death. It's like letting go. When something's
Mm.
really heavy or something's weighing on us, let go. Ceres would have had to go through this process to let go with all that wrath that she had, all that
Correct.
unmanageable emotion you could only imagine. Probably the only way through it was to detach. um,
Mm.
and when we look at that, I think the principle of sharing, like how do we share? We talk about that Taurus Scorpio polarity of shared resources. How do we share? Do we
Yep.
share? What do we
Yep.
share? Who do we share with? This is all part of that astrological process. And then I think the renewal, that's the amazing part of that. And I just love that polarity. So I looked at it and went, well, there, gee, then you can bring in other tarot cards if you wished, when you're
Mm.
looking at the astrology. Um,
Yeah.
with that, like you've got, well, like you said, the Empress, and that is very Taurian as well, but the
Mm.
Hierophant, and and then Scorpio, we've got,
The death card
yeah, I knew that.
and
I saw the
yeah,
horse.
yeah.
Okay, you know,
And Pluto judgment, which
but
is
yeah,
resurrection. Yeah.
yeah. So it's very interesting. I think when we're looking at loss and rejection and grief and sorrow, the principles around sharing are really paramount because this is where people can give and receive and support each other. And this
Yeah.
is where we get to understand what role we can play in that. So that was the second part. So did you want to talk anything? I've got another section, but did you want to talk about that Taurus Scorpio polarity? Because I know you'd love that too.
Well, the direct link is the original mythology. We have Demeter, which represents, goddess of the grain, and then we
Hmm.
have the underworld, which is Scorpio and
Scorpio.
Hades.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, again, it's just that beautiful,
Yeah.
parallel that we can always make, and it's about apply. It's like when you read tarot for people, it's applying that mirror to your personal journey, your story. and what you share and how that's relevant to you, because some of us have extreme life experiences where we can share those stories, and they are all the same themes. They are the themes of love, loss, grief, renewal, rebirth,
Mm.
transformation.
Yep.
Um, so that makes sense to me 100%. And I'm
Mm.
just so grateful that we've been able to actually do this podcast, because it just allows me to learn new things from you, and just be
And
able to
vice versa.
keep this open and keep it like
Mm.
a beautiful exchange. And you talk about, well, how do we share? Well, we're doing it right now. And
We
hopefully
are
our
doing it
listeners
right
are,
now.
can share
Yeah.
what they've learnt today from the podcast,
Mm.
and also share it on their social media so we can get the word out there.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Oh, and then the third aspect in relation to the astrology was Virgo and
Oh,
about
yes,
growth, yeah, productivity,
the Virgin.
the efficient functioning, work. And it's just like, well, what, you know, how do we relate that to ourselves? How do we, like, she was obviously a devoted mother, but
Mm.
in that she was the sole provider for her daughter,
Yeah,
and so much more. And so we look at Virgo's ability to be of service and to do the work and to do what's necessary to get the job done.
yeah.
And so I like that as well. What do you
Pay
think
the
about the
bills.
tarot card there?
Yeah, pay the bills, put food on the table.
Yep,
That's a
yep,
Virgo.
all of
Um,
that.
Absolutely. And this is where sort of all of mythology and different storytelling overlaps,
Yes.
and it can sort of circle into one or the other. I've always sort of thought, well, if Taurus or Venus is, or Demeter or Ceres is like the goddess of the grain, what where does Virgo come into it? Because Virgo's an earth sign also,
Mm,
but is known as the Virgin. I guess
yeah,
in a way, it's like, the maiden, mother, and the crone. It's the three versions of that life cycle and that process.
yeah,
Um, but no, I think the service aspect is probably key.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and being of service to, as a parent, if you are a parent, being of service to your circle, your community, um, and friends and family, and anybody that you can be of service to. I think that's where it sort of all boils down to. And Jupiter in the sky, sort of making sure that we're racking up those universal brownie points and doing the right thing, even when no
Mm.
one's watching. And that's when we are blessed with providence, protection, good fortune, and abundance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
that's nice, Renee. That's almost a finishing spot, but I'm going to keep talking. I,
Yeah,
I just
I
wanted to say, yeah. Do you want to say
no,
something else?
no, you go if you want
Oh,
to
I just wanted to say
close.
that Ceres in the chart, in our chart, personal charts,
Mm.
will point to what we must do to gain approval or what we're lacking if our needs haven't been met in early childhood. So that's sort of going back to that psychological component. But it's like
Mm.
this is where we can work with that and we can really look at that. And I like what you said about yours. And I know I'll explore mine a little bit more too,
Mm.
and possibly in relation to being right there, sitting there with Venus for mine. I'm just going, okay, so there's something there as well. But I think it's fascinating and we can do that. So, and well, not any, but some of the girls at Lightwork Women all do astrology and they'd be
Mm.
happy to work with anybody about looking at their chart and the goddesses. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think it does add a different aspect to a natal chart reading, and give
Mm,
people guidance on, you know, how that affects their relationships, or, their devotion, or their strategy, or,
yeah,
approaches to work and business. All of those things that the four sort of goddesses represent, and those four asteroids.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But
I believe.
I'll put a summary of this in the description as well, so people can kind of get a snapshot of what we're
Mm,
talking about, just in short form.
yeah, wonderful. Well, and I think when we look at Ceres in the horoscope as as the asteroid goddess, it's like this is where we get the opportunity to look at different components like the rulerships, what sign she sits in, what house she sits in, which we've alluded to, what planets are involved. You can also look at her in relation to the moon And if she's hard aspected to Pluto, there's things there that could be worth exploring as well, given all that we've talked about today. Um,
Absolutely.
so, yeah, I think that's about all I want to say in relation to the astrological component. But is there's anything else that you want to mention?
No, I think we should probably call that a wrap for a
Yeah.
40-minute podcast.
Oh, really?
We've gone a little bit over, but that's okay.
Yeah, good.
It's been amazing, Robyn. And as I said to everyone listening, we do have 3 more episodes on this sort of 4-part series. So please stay tuned, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram pages, as well as if you're a listener, you can also tune into Spotify. So we've got those 4 platforms, and I'll put details below on where you can subscribe. And if you want to visit anything more about Lightwork Women, we have an official website, lightworkwomen.com. And you can check out all of the other lovely ladies as well if you'd like tarot reading, astrology charts, and lots of other good stuff as well. So thank you so much, Robyn. It's been a
Yes.
treasure.
Thank you. As always, I love doing these podcasts with you. Thank you.
I'll look forward to our next one. So
Yeah,
thanks again, Robyn, and we'll see you
thank you.
next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Lightwork Women. If you'd like to find out more about any of the guests on our show and our practitioners, visit our website, lightworkwomen.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.